And like whining and dining your customers, it's the same thing as your employees. So are you an honest person? And the response is going to be,
the younger generations want places that... You're listening to the Roofing Success Podcast, a show created to inspire roofing contractors to achieve optimal success in their roofing businesses. I'm the host, Jim Aline, the co-author of the books Internet Marketing for Roofing Contractors and The Best Known Roofer. I'm also the co-founder of Roofer Marketers, the leading digital marketing agency for the roofing industry. On each episode, I sit down with industry leaders to talk about their processes, the lessons they've learned, and how to find success in roofing. Hey, welcome to another episode of the Roofing Success Podcast. Click the buttons. Subscribe, comment, follow, like, all of those. Press them. Press all those buttons. Leave us a comment. Leave us a review. We appreciate it. Today we have Dr. Jessica Stahl with us from Ignite Results. How are you today?
I'm good. Thanks so much for having me. I know we've been trying to schedule this podcast for the last year, so I'm really glad that it worked out for today.
Definitely. So for those of you for our listeners that don't know who you are, what you do, give us a little background. How did you get into roofing, and what do you do for the roofing industry?
Yeah, so I've been in roofing probably, 16 years. My family owns a large roofing company out of Nashville, Music City Roofers. And that's how I really got into the industry. Is my dad kind of tanked our company and was making all the classic mistakes that roofers make. And he actually ended up having a stroke and almost died. Wow. And he still thinks I'm 12. So it's like once he was in such kind of like a dire state, then he was really open to listening to me and to my brother. And that was about 8 years ago. So I really started consulting in the space around 8 years ago, but I've been in roofing and contracting since I was 2.
Yeah, it's been your life, the family business, right?
Exactly.
So one of the, what's your background before or outside of roofing?
Yeah, so I got my PhD at Clemson, and I was a professor there. I was teaching statistics, and so I'm a huge nerd. Yeah, I mean, I felt like I was kind of a nerd going into grad school, but after being in school for 10 years, it's like I had to relearn social skills, I feel like. So I got my PhD at Clemson, and I was working with Fortune 100 companies. So FedEx, the headquarters of Goodwill. I worked at Publix Supermarkets, which is a big Fortune 100 company. And I spent about 8 years in corporate. And then that's really how I got all of the knowledge and skills that I brought to roofing. I didn't really know if this Fortune 100 approach and using everything I learned in a PhD would work in roofing. But at that time, I was like, I don't know if this is going to work, but this is kind of our only shot to save the company. So I learned a lot of things from Fortune 100 applied, and a lot of things didn't. And so from there, it was kind of learn as you go. We were at 4 million at that point. We're at 18 million, and the company just sold about 3 months ago.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. Mm-hmm. So you said there's some things that did work and some things that didn't work. I think that's an interesting place to start, right? Mm-hmm. Because a lot of the roofing community doesn't come from the Fortune 500 background, or and so they don't have that corporate experience. They don't have the lens that a large organization looks at things. What are some of the things that translated well, and what are some of the things that didn't translate well?
Yeah, I think one of the things that really translated well is when you see in a lot of corporate companies, they have their core values defined, and they're hiring and firing to those core values. And that's something that we really missed on. Is their core values, the mission, vision statement. It goes beyond just words, and really finding people that align with not only what the company's doing, but where we want it to go. So I would say that was really one of the biggest things. And And yesterday I made this post. I was going through all the mission and vision statements. I've written over 300
I
unique
saw
mission
that.
and vision
That's right.
statements.
I saw that post.
Yeah,
Yeah.
over like 400 core value statements. Um, I've worked with over 40 roofing companies to define these and really using that as a starting point and their why, and not just starting from how much money we make, but who do we want to be in the process.
Let's talk about that because I think that's an exercise that's so impactful for a company.
Mm-hmm.
That exercise of defining those core values. I've seen it done well and I've seen it done not well. When I've seen it done not well, a lot of times it's just words on paper,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's not a lot of thought put into it. There's not a lot of there's it does not align with the why. They're not
Mm-hmm.
thinking about how you can potentially measure your team against them. What are some
Mm-hmm.
of the things that make that process, or what is that? What's a good starting point for that process for a contractor, and what should the end result be?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when I take companies through this, we do an exercise called the legacy exercise, and like really thinking of like with the end in mind of how do you want to be remembered. So that's the first thing that I do is I have a whole questionnaire that contractors will fill out is when, because you're not going to have this business forever. You're either going to die, you're going to sell, or you're going to leave it to somebody else. And that's really your only options, or you go out of business.
Yeah.
So how do you want to be remembered? So starting with that, and then people will say, okay, we want somebody with integrity. But I've had probably 30 out of the 40 people say integrity is a core value, but they don't all define it the same way. So what does integrity mean?
Mm,
Is that, transparency in your pricing? Is that admitting mistakes? Is that making sure we're paying our subs on time? Is that, what exactly does integrity mean to you? So, like, really defining that. And then it goes to how do we hold them accountable? So, when I'm working with companies long term, I create a performance appraisal based on those core values. So, if you're telling me integrity means, being reliable, that's going to be a check on like the performance review. So, really coaching and holding people accountable through performance reviews, that's a huge thing, is that accountability piece.
definitely. I want to go back to how to be remembered. What are
Yeah.
some of after being involved in this process for so many companies, what are some of the standout, you don't have to name names, but like what were some of the things that like people who stood out and you were like, wow, that was like what they said there of how they wanted to be remembered, like that's a good one.
Hmm. Yeah. So I've had some companies want to be a disruptor in the industry,
Yep.
like really focusing on being like super high tech and leveraging technology and wanting to run really lean. So, like an innovator and a disruptor. I thought that one was really interesting.
Yeah.
I worked with a company this week, and um, they wanted to be able to help other small businesses start up, specifically in Africa. So, which I thought was really cool, is to grow a business and help support small businesses over in Africa. So, as a community leader,
Yeah.
those are a couple from this year from the last couple weeks that kind of stand out.
Yeah, I've had a few people on the podcast, so we've gotten into that why, and I'm like Charles Antis out in with Antis Roofing out in Orange County, like
Mm-hmm.
the his philanthropic efforts are his why. Like, and it like kind of to your point about the person who wants to start the support small businesses over in Africa. Like, there's these that a lot of times we just think, it's or what I should say is when we start a business, a lot of times we're just trying to put food on the table,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
Yeah.
we don't get to sit back and think about these big things like your
Mm-hmm.
why, right? Like it's like oh my goodness, I got to go sell a roof and build the roof and collect the check and put it in the bank so that I can pay my bills, right? Like, and so that defining of the why over time, do you think that you need to know it right away? I guess is the like where I was going with that. Do you think you need to know it right away, or is this something that can evolve over time?
I think you should have a general idea, but
Yeah.
you need to revisit it every year.
Hmm.
So some of the core values may have changed. But I think when you're starting, you need to know kind of like your bottom line values of what's more important than money. Because especially in your first year with all of the stress and all of the lessons, there needs to be some type of moral compass to refer back to. Because like I think we start our businesses with great intentions,
Yeah.
but what I see is we don't always remain intentional. So at least having some type of groundwork there as like an anchor with all the stress that happens.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. It, it and I love the idea of revisiting, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like everything in your life changes, right? Like it's our lives are constantly evolving and changing. Our interests, our desires, our everything is constantly evolving. So as that's evolving, like wow, maybe at a point in time you for example, with back to Charles Antis from Antis Roofing, he had a child who was born premature, and they were in the NICU for some weeks during that process. And in
Mm-hmm.
there, the Ronald McDonald House was in there helping his family. And so when
Mm-hmm.
they left there, that became a passion for him, right? Because to help other people have that experience. So uh, like for people listening, it's not just it doesn't you don't have it's not hard in stone. Like this isn't in stone, right? And
Mm-hmm.
another thing, like I've seen people choose poor core values, or that, like
Mm-hmm.
you said, they said integrity, but they really didn't know what that meant.
Mm-hmm.
That that is something that can evolve also, but you better pick them
Mm-hmm.
first, right? You have to have them to evolve them, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, and I think some can be aspirational as
Yeah,
well of where you want to
yeah.
be. But when people say, okay, we have a core value of growth, and I'm like, oh, do you have a training program? No.
Hmm.
Do you go to conferences? No. Are you reading books as a team? No. Are you investing in technology? No. So you don't have a growth of value. You have a growth of being stagnant or a value of being stagnant. There's no, but there, you don't have that core value. Or you're
Yeah.
saying we have a culture of accountability. Do you have job descriptions? No. Do you have a standard way of paying? No. Do you have any type of expectations or minimums for salespeople? No. Okay. Do you have any expectations and checklists for your people in the field? No. Okay. You don't have a culture of accountability. You have a culture of people can do whatever they want.
Hmm.
So
That's
yeah.
insightful. Like the way that the way that not just defining, because a lot of times it's just the big words that are used in the core values. I love that. Like getting into the nuance of it. I've heard some unique ways of finding your core values, right? Of course, some of the ones are, hey, if you are a person of integrity, we'll just use that one, right? Like, and you make sure that everything is taken care of, and if something happens on a job, you're going to take care of it. Like you are a person of high integrity, that then you would have a core value of integrity. I've heard it on the other side where, let's say you've had employees that you didn't like over the years, that you can look at the traits that they had that you didn't like, and the
Mm-hmm.
opposite of that is your core value, right? Like it's like, no, I'm not standing for that. I
Mm-hmm.
can't have that in my company.
Mm-hmm.
How what are some ways that people can get to those core values?
Yeah. So I think we're going into busy season in roofing. And when you're thinking about the people that you want to hire, I think that's, making a list of all the attributes of the
Hmm.
people we want to hire and making a list of attributes that we don't want to hire on or behaviors that we've seen that haven't worked out. And I think that's kind of how I define core values is looking at the specific behaviors. So in looking at past performers, what really makes them stand out? Are they, helping collect checks for a sales rep that was sick? Are they, you know, have great follow up with customers? Is it they're, helping set up for meetings? Like what makes them a superstar? So I think like a lot of times we're only revisiting what we want in an employee when we're about to hire someone. So it's great because we're going into busy season. So I would recommend making that list of the things we want and the things we don't want.
Yeah. And that's what you said, like you were talking about, is that this becomes a measuring stick. Like I understand that from EOS, right? The people analyzer, right? So on an ongoing basis, right? Like you're on an ongoing basis, you're measuring people against the core values of your company, and if they get it, want it, or have the capacity to do it, right? Like you're just, it becomes a rhythm in how you get to. It was amazing when we implemented EOS years ago, and the first time I went through that exercise, it was eye-opening in some ways, right? Like, oh, and then being very strict, getting very strict. We've gotten very strict too. If you do not exude or if you do not share in our core value, we'll find someone who does. Like and not that it's up to them. If we see that if through their actions, and that's what I heard you talk about in action, right? Like if through their actions, they are not exuding our core values, then yeah, we're going to part ways. So how do we bring that back? I know one of the things that you specialize in is that hiring process, right? So now let's say they've defined their core values, they understand their core values. Let's talk about hiring good people.
Yeah. So I can talk about like bringing the core values into the interview process, which is something that you'll see in a lot of corporate companies, but something that's never been done in a structured format in roofing until Ignite brought that here. So how we do it is we'll take each of the core values. So let's just say integrity. And somebody's like, we want to hire somebody with integrity. So what do you think they're going to say? Are you an honest person? And their response is going to be as honest as they come.
That's right.
So like that's not what I'm counting as a great interview question. But asking them specific things like, tell me about a time when you encountered an ethical dilemma. How did you handle it? So asking like really behavioral based questions on each of those core values. So for growth, it's, tell me about your career goals. What have you done in the past year? If we're looking at reliability, tell me about a time you didn't make it to work on time. So asking questions that map on each of those core values and then rating them. So you have like a rating scale. So integrity, okay, they get a 5 on that. Communication, maybe they're a 2 on that. So they have a rating, like it's kind of like a scorecard, an interview scorecard with their core values. And not everyone's going to be a 5 across the board. So instead of just starting with a yes, we hire them, or no, we don't, now we can break it down to why. We know this person has some communication issues, but they have great experience. We know they have a lot of integrity, but they may be lacking on the service side. So you have a lot better starting point than just a yes or a no.
Yeah. And it's so I'm not from the corporate world. I'm from the small business entrepreneurial world, like growing from bootstrapping from nothing kind of. And I remember early on, I used to I always thought these, like, what kind of crazy questions are they asking in these interviews, right? From like a corporate perspective. I'm like, what, like, why are they asking this? Like, who's going to be honest and who's going to, like, it's like kind of like you said, they're always going to say, oh yeah, of course I'm, I have integrity. Of course I'm honest. But over the years, I've learned to kind of really like, wow, okay, that's a cool way of asking it because you get a different perspective on some of those things. what are some of those questions? I know you listed a couple of them, but like if
Mhm.
you were to do an interview for someone in a sales position, like
Mhm.
what would be some of those questions you would want to ask them in that interview process that would lead you to believe that they could be successful in that role?
Yeah. So I, yeah, for sales, I'm thinking about an interview guide that I did last week, and it's for a smaller company, and they're hiring an operations
Hmm,
manager.
let's
And
do that.
so
Yeah.
one of the questions that I ask is, how in your previous job, which processes have you improved? Tell me about like a process improvement you made. How do you operate when there's not a lot of structure? How do you provide structure to an environment that there's no structure? So, like, it was more of a startup. So, asking those specific questions about
Yeah.
the specific tasks that they're going to have to do.
Because
So,
there's no structure. I love that question. Because there is no
mhm,
structure yet. There is not structure yet. How are you going to create structure? Because there are great
yeah,
operators who need the structure to be in place. They need the machine built for them to like they can run the
exactly.
machine really well, but they may not be
Hmm.
good at building the machine. So if you're
Hmm.
thinking about an operations manager and you're a small business, how would you fill a gap? Like how would you fill a gap in our processes? Like those yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's one that I did for sales reps. I typically ask about specific goals that they set in the past year and have they met them. And I always like to ask about, tell me about a challenge that you encountered in your last job and how did you overcome it? So, I mean, grit and handling rejection. What's the best way to build rapport with a new customer?
Yeah.
Yeah, making sure that they can, like, those communication skills, that's going to be one of the most important things for them.
Yeah, can they communicate? Can they vote? And maybe like the way that they say it, you're listening to what they're saying to you. If they're like yeah, more yes, no, very short answer, like
Hmm.
salespeople might need to be more animated in their in their explanations of things or something like that. What other
Hmm.
positions like let's talk about other positions and other things to look for, production manager maybe or um,
Hmm. Yeah. So we hire all different types of positions. We just hired a GM for a startup, like a private equity group. They got together and really started a business from scratch, had this idea to start it from scratch. And we hired the GM, then we're hiring the admin operations manager, like building this whole team from scratch. So one of the things that we really asked is operating with when there is no when there's ambiguity, like, how do you figure things out? What's
hmm,
going to be your process? Because he's not from roofing. The
yeah,
GM that we hired to run a roofing company is not from roofing. And actually, like that, he comes from solar and has a lot of good experience. But how are you going to figure it out? And I loved his response. And one of the reasons we ended up hiring him is he's like, I already reached out to two of my friends that are in roofing. I've already been learning about CRMs. And this was on the first interview. He's telling me how he's figuring things out. So that was really, really important. And then also giving feedback to employees. That was something that we were looking for is, tell me
oh
about a time when you managed someone that was struggling. How did you retrain them? What conversations did you have? And those were the two most important things that we were looking for, is figuring it out and then coaching other people.
yeah. So you're really thinking about like you're really thinking being conscious about the position that you're hiring for, the
Hmm.
job duties of that person, and asking questions in relation to that. If I'm going to
Hmm.
simplify it as much
Yeah.
like to put it
Yeah.
in a simple way, right? Like you really
Hmm.
want to be the same questions don't need to be asked in every interview.
Yeah, exactly. Well, not for every position, but yeah,
Not for
like,
every position. Yeah, not
yeah,
for different positions, different questions may be more appropriate. Maybe that's a better way.
exactly.
Yeah.
So for roofing, yeah, we have 12 different interview guides for each position, or for all the positions, for 12
Got it.
different positions. where we've come up with questions that are really standard for those positions. And when we sell our product, we have our job description, we have, our core value sheet, we have our interview guides.
Let's talk about that a little bit. I think that that's a missing piece, or something that a lot of businesses overlook, is the job description.
Mm-hmm.
It's corporate America has a job description for every role in the company, right? Like, we're talking about every single role and every variation of that role, right? Are you
Exactly.
an operations director level 2 job description, or an operations
Exactly.
director level 1 job description, right? Like, we have, so, what is the importance of that job description?
Yeah. So when I started consulting about 15 years ago, that's kind of all I was doing, is writing job descriptions. And I was working for the government. So it was like a county right outside of Nashville. And so that's exactly how it was. Operations manager 1, 2, 3, everything is like, exactly. So I'm laughing because that's exactly how it is. Yeah. So before you can know what type of person you want to hire or what you're supposed to train, like having a task list of what they're actually supposed to do. And so I do interviews whenever I do consulting. I'll interview everybody in their role. And it's so surprising what they tell me they do and what their manager thinks that they do are not the same thing.
Yeah.
So we're essentially evaluating and paying someone for a job that they're not even doing. They're doing this person's in marketing, and we're paying them to be an admin. It's like it's not like they're in the field with the salespeople. They're not answering phones. And they're, yeah. So that's really interesting to just document the qualifications as well. When someone's like, oh, we need somebody with a master's degree to answer the phones, it's like, I don't think that's right. Or if we're putting a field supervisor out there and they can't use a computer, I mean, if this person has to be in the CRM, then we're going to have to screen for that.
Yeah, they'll have to have the skill set necessary for that role. A lot of times in small businesses, those job, like what I heard, like what you'd said, made me think of something, that those jobs get the org chart gets muddled, right? Like, there's
Exactly.
people in multiple seats. How can you, or how would you give someone advice in that? Because we're starting with an account, maybe like from I always go back to EOS. So it's like you're starting with your accountability chart, right? And there are multiple names in those seats, or one person's name is in multiple seats, I should say. And so, when you're writing a job description for someone who is going to do multiple seats, as you're growing, what are some thoughts on that?
Yeah. So that's a great question. And for this company that just started, they're projected to do 4 million this year and hopefully 8 million next year. So the role of a $4 million company, if you're like a production manager there, is much different than if you're an $8 million company. When you're talking about production at a $4 million company, that person's in the office and the field. They're managing both sections. When you're talking about an $8 million company, the production manager is typically office based, and you have quality control people out in the field. So that's a different structure. So the way I mapped it out is literally put production manager, Jason, quality control manager, Jason. Like, have the org structure and literally designate that you're doing these two jobs, and these are the job descriptions for the two jobs. And then putting percentages of time there. So I think that's really important. Yes, they're doing it, but what percentage of time is dedicated to the field versus the office? I think that's where a lot of miscommunication happens, is not necessarily what they're doing, but what's the quality standard and how much time are they allocating to each of these job duties? Because we can simply say, oh, they're not coming into the office, so they're not working. And it's like, no, like 70% of the time has to be in the field, and that's why.
That's an aha moment, because when they're in those multiple seats, it's having an understanding of what percentage of their time they are going to spend in each of those. And I think that if you don't define that and express that, that's where the challenge happens, right? And like what you had said, well, why is he out in the field all the time? The other people around him don't know that 70%
Exactly.
of his time is going to be allocated to that. Another
Mm-hmm.
thing I think about in the growth, right? And in people being in multiple seats and then growing into one seat as the company grows,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes uh, it's unfortunate, but sometimes the people that got us here are not the people to get us there.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So
100%.
that person that is good at being in a couple of those seats, have you run across this where you see this where it's like, man, this person is really good, but they we need a different, like a person with a different skill set now that we're at
Mm-hmm.
this level. And
Yeah.
how do you reallocate that talent, especially if they do still share your core values?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's super important. And I think when we are looking at, I think that's referring back to job descriptions
Hmm.
of how is this role going to change? So is this going to be now it's a production manager and we need the production manager that is mainly predominantly a field guy. Now we need someone to build out a CRM, and we need somebody to, be more heavy on the finances because our job profit's suffering. So that's a different type person than the field person.
Yeah.
So then we would go revisit those job descriptions and say, okay, you're going to fit here in this seat. Are you comfortable doing this? And I had to do that with a company this past year as they promoted their field guy to an operations manager, and he completely failed with the tech skills, with the reporting, with the accountability, but he was so knowledgeable about
Hmm.
everything in the installation standards. So that was a really tough conversation, but putting him back in the field, keeping his same pay, but just rearranging duties.
Yeah.
And then there's some people that we want to be able to promote them, but they don't have the leadership skills. And
Yep.
that's where leadership training comes in.
Yep.
And that's why we started our leadership academy at Ignite. And it's a 6-week program that we run. And we talk about giving feedback, time management, performance management, compliance and safety, and really giving new leaders a space to grow.
That especially as companies grow, right? The need for that building of leadership grows. And so, now we've hired people where they're in the right seats, and now, but on an ongoing basis, training and development of your people. What tips and tricks, or what are your thoughts on how a company can do that effectively?
Yeah. So I can tell you how companies have failed. I think that's always a good conversation.
Yep.
So they come up with too many ideas at once and try to run with it. Like, okay, we're going to read these 3 books and we're all going to attend this conference. And then you overwhelm your team and nothing gets implemented.
Yeah.
So the way that I structure it, and it's very similar to the way we work in corporate, is going quarter by quarter. Like we're doing one leadership development activity per quarter, and it's going to be mapped on to the core values. So um, for Oberg Roofing, for instance, one of their core values is called "We Are the Community." So for that quarter, they spoke in middle schools
Ah.
as a team. They did a parade as a team, and they did like a toy drive in the company. But everything, all of their actions are aligned with that core value for the quarter.
Mm.
So then the next quarter, it's focusing on ownership, like extreme ownership, which is their core value. So they all read Atomic Habits for that quarter. So it really needs to map onto an overall strategy. And just like instead of just like pulling books like, oh, this is great, let's read Traction or Rocket Fuel
Yeah.
or Good to Great. why are we doing this? So that's
Yeah.
what it needs to go back to the core values on a
So
quarterly basis, not doing too much.
yeah, so that's a big part. I think that's a good thing to point out, because if you people have to do their jobs too,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so if there's too much emphasis over here on the training and development side, then they don't have time to do their jobs, and they're maybe trying to pull too many things into what they're doing that they're learning. And it's like, oh, would you maybe at the end of that quarter, reading Atomic Habits or something like that, then everyone sits down and says like, hey, how can we take this and make it a part of our day-to-day processes? How can we take that and improve upon our day-to-day operations? Is that how do
Mm-hmm.
they how do you see that working through on
Yeah.
that?
So when I have my companies read books, I have them do weekly discussion questions
Hmm.
with those books. So 10 minutes. So this was the sales team that we rolled it out. And so each week was 10 to 15 minutes in the sales meeting to talk about specific discussion questions. What did you learn this week? What are you working on? But yeah, like the most ineffective way to create a leader is just to give them a book and never talk about it again.
Yeah.
So that's like that, weekly, monthly accountability
So
to have that
that's
discussion.
also that. Yeah, I was just going to say that's that accountability. Like, hey, you have to be to this part of the book to have this discussion. So we got to make sure everyone's on the same page there. That's interesting to me, an interesting connection that was made for me. Sales team, Atomic Habits,
Mm-hmm.
because really sales is so much about discipline, right? And so with
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
in the book Atomic Habit, like you have to have those, you have to be very disciplined in your day to day and in the tasks that you do and in how you spend your time. That
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, they're just a little off track there, but I'm like, oh, that's a
Yeah,
good one. Like that's a good one for sales teams. Like,
for sure. And then it's also like the accountability piece for sales to think, okay, we're just going to give them this book. It
yeah.
goes beyond that. Like you need to be doing weekly one-on-ones with the sales team.
Mm,
So holding them accountable to the goals that they set, looking at their pipeline, asking them, getting their weekly wins, understanding their roadblocks, and having that structured time with each salesperson. So if we want accountability within the salespeople, we have to provide accountability from a leadership perspective.
yeah, that's awesome. And then I think that kind of leads to, I mean, you guys hire, train, retain, right? That's kind of the
Mhm.
core, kind of principles that everything is based around. Like that's the retention, right? Like you're helping them grow. They feel more involved in their job. And I'm just making assumptions here. You could say it. I'm sure you could say it a lot more eloquently than me, right? Like, so where does it lead to? You're hiring the right people. You're making sure that they're trained properly, and then you
Mhm.
want to keep them long term, right?
Mhm.
So, what are some
Yeah.
strategies there?
Yeah. So kind of like the buzzword is engagement. And the what I recommend in a lot of my roofing companies, they'll run an employee engagement survey every year
Yep.
just to get a pulse and get
Yeah.
feedback from everything from leadership communication to pay, and really getting an overview of looking at the data of what's
Yeah.
going good and what's not. So I love doing that. All my clients that work with me on a long-term contract, we run those engagement surveys for them when we first start, because we don't want to go in and solve problems or create problems that don't exist.
Yeah.
So getting the data there, um, and then I'll always say do exit interviews with the people that leave and get that data as well about why they're leaving. And then having a lot of people leave because of poor management.
Mm.
So they feel ignored. So making sure we're doing one-on-ones and giving feedback. All managers should be meeting with their people either weekly or bi-weekly, whether they're an admin, production person. There's got to be a one-on-one with them weekly or bi-weekly. And people are like, oh, I don't have time to do one-on-ones. Well, you're either going to invest the time in a one-on-one or you're going to invest the time to hire and train somebody
Mm,
else. Because getting feedback,
yeah.
especially the younger generation, there's a couple things. They want a sense of purpose, they want a sense of development, and they want consistent communication. So if you don't have all of those three things, then you're just going to be in this endless cycle of hiring and training.
How many direct reports is too many direct reports?
I think it depends on the position.
Yeah.
But I think anytime there's more than five, it becomes difficult to give it personalized attention.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too in the one-on-ones and things like that. I had that conversation on another podcast recently from someone who was in the military, and it's four. Like it's four, four,
Mhm.
four, four, four. Everyone has four direct reports from the top down, right? Like, and and just to your point, it's like if there's too many, then there's not enough attention. And so if you're the owner and you have your whole company is directly reporting to you, you're going to have a hard time, right? There's going to be some
Yeah,
challenges there. Um, what do you
yeah.
look for in that employee? So are you, do you do those employee engagement? We do like ENPS type scores and things like that. But we'll do them randomized over the course of a year. So we'll just continuously do anonymous, ENPS scores. What, like,
Mhm.
yearly on an ongoing basis, different questions that maybe a couple of different surveys that you do during the year? What do you think is most effective there?
Yeah. So, especially if companies aren't doing surveys and now they're starting to do surveys like even quarterly, people are going to burn out and not take them. So, it needs to be like the survey we do is 40 questions, but
Oh, so
then,
that's
but
extensive. Yeah, like you're really
yeah,
getting some information. Yeah.
so, but you would only want to run that once a year
Yeah.
because people are going to get burnout from doing that. So, if there's any type of follow up, then less than 10 questions. So, but like twice a year is a good touch base.
Yep.
I mean, roofing's a high turnover industry.
Yeah.
So, touching base every 6 months, but you want to be careful about burning people out.
I talk about this a lot. I think that, like, because I come from the marketing side of things, so I think of a lot of times we don't think about marketing to our team, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there's like four core areas of marketing. You're marketing for new customers, right? That's what we all focus on, like with marketing for new customers. But then there's a portion of your marketing that should go to marketing to your current customers for referrals, right? To
Mm-hmm.
the customers that you have. Then there's the third area is marketing to future employees,
Mm-hmm.
and then marketing to your current team. So the Christmas parties, the Brainerd Lakes, like what we talked about, going to the resort. Oberg went to the resort and took their team and things like that. Like taking everyone to a conference maybe and spending some team time and doing, like, I think that's a retention piece also.
100%. Yeah.
What do you see in that regard? Like how, especially like you had mentioned the younger generations, right? The younger generations
Mm-hmm.
want places that they feel purpose, but they also have fun. And
Mm-hmm.
so what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I always say that recruiting is marketing. I'll say that all the time, that people think recruiting is an HR function, and it's much more marketing and sales than any type of HR. So I totally get that. Like, people need to spend money on recruiting videos and showcasing their culture. And
Yeah.
like when you're recruiting, it's much more powerful to have a 60-second video than a whole bunch of text on your careers page. So I totally see that. It's interesting that you said marketing to your internal team because I didn't really think about it like that. But that's exactly what it
That's
is
what it
giving away
is,
promo items like with the
right?
company
Like at a
brand.
trade show or something, right? It's like you're giving away promo items at the home show or something. It's the same thing. When you're providing those, yeah,
Yeah.
it's a
And
it's
like
a
whining and
yeah,
dining your customers, it's the same thing as your employees. So yeah, I didn't really think about it like that, as like, that's also marketing, but that makes perfect sense. I really like that.
And I think that it's intentionality. I think you may have kind of mentioned it early on in the conversation. Like, it's being intentional about a lot of these things, right? Being intentional about your hiring process, being intentional about developing your core values. And one thing I want to speak to, because I think this is something that you said that I'm like, man, this is hiring versus recruiting. I think that a lot of times we wait, right? And I look at hiring as, I need someone now. But then the recruiting side is, hey, we can take our time. We can go and identify prospects that we think may be a good fit for that, and we can get them to want to work with us. Not just hey, we put a post up on LinkedIn, or a job description up on LinkedIn, and we got some people who responded. Like, hiring versus recruiting. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, like the warm body method is kind of like,
It's very successful. That's probably the best way to hire, right? Like, yeah.
Yeah, it's like, okay, you have a pulse, you can be a sales rep. And
Yeah.
you look at the turnover rate in roofing, it's almost 90% of 1099 salespeople turn over in that first year, 70% turnover in the first month.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of like, oh, like churn or burn. But it's really about, when I'm thinking about the hiring process, it comes down to like the intentionality. Is it going to be successful? Like going back to the core values and actually writing a job ad that speaks to the type of people that we want. Um, if you're just wanting money hungry people, then that's all you're going to get. You're not going to be getting like that loyalty. If you want people that are going to come and stay, then you need to be able to have your core values written like that. You need to have communication. You need to be living that internally. And like, yeah, it really, if you need to hire a position fast, you need to wait a month. So I always say, like, you're desperate to hire somebody. From the time you launch an ad on Indeed to the time somebody comes in the door, to do it right, it takes a month, 2 weeks to prospect and get the leads to come in, a week to interview, and a week, maybe two, for them to quit their job and start at your company.
That's right.
So it really does take a month. If you're trying to hire someone tomorrow, then it's probably not going to be a good fit, because you're going to find someone unemployed and desperate.
That's what you find, right? And so now I think that there's a thought process there, is you have to start to put some thought into who you will need and when, right? And let's go back to like your hire, train, retain, right? So you need to think about, okay, I need someone for this role down the road, but I need time to get them up to speed. Plus and train them properly. Then I need time to find that person. Maybe that's 3 months. Maybe you're back 6 months. You may be back 18 months on that position, right? If you're looking for a high level general manager or something, like, you may be thinking of that far before. And so like that, how can an owner start to lay that out and see the future needs of the company?
Yeah, so that's one of the first things I do with a client. Is after we have their core values, we call it a workforce development plan. So if we're at 3 million and we want to get to 5 million, 10 million, 20 million, building out those respective org charts for each phase of growth. Like, we can handle 250 builds with this org chart. We can handle, 500 builds a year with this org chart. And then for each phase, I highlight in green, these are the positions that we're going to need at this phase. And I'll always back it up 60 days. So like, we need to hire salespeople in March. We started this week with the plan. We're going to launch February 1st, and we're going to get the training program in place, and then they're going to be ready to go for March. But yeah, a workforce development plan, work charts for each of those stages of growth. That's been to where you can actually see it. Like, okay, we're going to need 6 reps, which means we need 2 quality project managers out in the field, which means we need a director here. So being able to really like map that out so there's no surprises.
Because this is business and you will have surprises. So
yeah, as much as we can predict.
That's right. So we have to be as intentional as possible in predicting, because stuff will come at us from all angles. What do you think? You said you were 2 years old when your father started Music City, and like growing up in the business, and then coming back into it from corporate America and starting the consulting coaching. What is your greatest insight that you could share with the audience that will help them find success in their roofing businesses?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think like beginning with the end in mind is really important, of where you want to go with the company, like really having that vision. And you need to be running a company that's both profitable and fulfilling, both of those. If you're running a company that's super fulfilling, you might as well run a charity. And if you're running a company that's highly profitable and you don't care about people, then that's a really empty life. So you really have to have both and be intentional about both.
That's awesome. Dr. Jessica Stahl, Ignite Results, thanks for joining us today. This has been another episode of the Roofing Success Podcast. If you would like to generate more revenue through your digital marketing efforts, please visit roofermarketers.com to get a copy of the book, The Best Known Roofer. Also, check the training section of the website for guides on everything from running effective pay-per-click ads to how to properly set up your Google My Business listing. Thanks for listening.